Hafiz al-Quran, Sahib al-Quran, and send for all the children here, inshallah. I would like to call Brother Junaid back again now, inshallah, to read a Na'at.
Sallallahu alayka ya وسلم عليك يا حبيب الله صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله وسلم عليك يا حبيب الله لم يأتي نظيرك في نظر لم يأتي نظيرك في نظر مثل تنشد پیدا جانا जगराज को ताज तोरे सर सो है तुझको शहदो सरा जाना या रसूल अल्लाह या हबीब अल्लाह या रसूल अल्लाह या हबीब अल्लाह या रसूल अल्लाह या हबीब अल्लाह أنا في أحتشم وسخاك عتم سوى باك أبر كرم سوى باك أبر كرم برسن هارم
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Alhamdulillah, it's an honor to be here in Birmingham for day 5 of our beautiful talk with Shaykh Mosaad. Firstly, we'd like to thank our dear brothers and sisters from Birmingham who helped to put on this program. Sister Faria, Brother Ataf, and Brother Adil, and all the community. So we're really honored. Alhamdulillah, it's been a beautiful day. In Birmingham, we were at a retreat location in Stafford, and this evening at this beautiful Masjid in Smethwick. So as I mentioned, Shaykh Walead's been on a tour since Slough and Peterborough, then Cambridge. We had Aylesbury last night. Alhamdulillah, we're here in Birmingham. And tonight's program, alhamdulillah, is a very relevant topic, which is about protecting your faith and navigating our iman as Muslims in the modern age. For those who are not familiar with our dear Shaykh, I just want to go through a little bit about him, and then inshallah we'll hand over the platform to him. There'll be a short talk by Shaykh Mosaad, and thereafter we've got a beautiful opportunity to ask questions. So please, inshallah, if you feel comfortable in asking questions after Shaykh Walead's talk, please do so, otherwise write it down. And inshallah this program will be going until Maghrib Salah. So Bismillah. Shaykh Dr. Walead Mosaad is an internationally recognized scholar in Islamic studies and human development. His academic and traditional training has accorded him the opportunity to work with many communities worldwide as a teacher and a project driver. He has completed his degrees from Rutgers University and Fath Islamic Seminary in Damascus. He received his PhD from the University of Exeter in Arab and Islamic Studies and was also classically trained at the Al-Azhar University. He has been blessed to study with many luminary scholars such as Shaykh Ahmad Tahar, Shaykh Ali Duman, Shaykh Sayyid Ramadan Bhuti, Shaykh Quraim Rajih, and many other notable scholars in the region of the Levant and around the world. And alhamdulillah, we've got the great honor to be able to listen to him this evening. He is currently the great chair and scholar in residence of Sabil community. He has traveled extensively throughout the Muslim world as well as Europe and the Far East, delivering lectures on various topics including spirituality, ethics, and intercultural peace building. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to our dear Shaykh, and then inshallah thereafter will be a Q&A. Jazakallah khair.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وانعم على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا وقرة اعيننا قائد الغر المحجلين وشفيع المذنبين وسيد ولد ادم والفخر محمد بن عبد الله وعلى اله واصحابه ومن والاه ثم اما بعد. So first I'd like to express my deep sense of honor and gratitude for being invited to speak in this very beautiful masjid, this very beautiful Bayt of Allah, house of God. If I understand, newly finished and commissioned, and that's a very beautiful thing, a very heartening thing to see that here in the UK, in Britain, with all of the very luminous and non-presences here with us. This blessed month also of Muharram, the first year of the Hijri year of 1445 years after the Hijrah of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the topic that we have been asked to address, modern challenges, and it is the sunnah of the ulama to define terms before they start speaking about it. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes thinking about what we mean by modern and what we mean by modernity before we actually address it. And in order to do that, we have to understand what do we mean by Deen and what do we mean by Islam. Inna Deen Abdullahi al-Islam. So, in the Deen of Islam, the Deen with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
is Islam. And sometimes Deen is defined as religion. And one of the challenges we face when we try to define words from one tradition, not just a language, but from a whole tradition and culture and civilization into another civilization's language, they don't always actually correspond that well. There is what we call an intellectual history behind the word religion. here in what we would say Europe or Western societies that is different than our perception of what we think to be Deen or Islam. So religion has come to mean, in our contemporary times, that which you do in terms of a ritual basis, a set of ritual practices that you may adhere to. So for Catholics, for example, that includes the sacraments and communion, other things like that that you may have heard about. And for Judaism, it may include the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah, rituals that are rites of passage are included in all of that. And it doesn't really have much to say, at least in the modern understanding, of what the religion does for everything outside of those religious or ritual practices. And that is fundamentally at odds with our understanding of Deen. Deen means, sounding cliche, but it's true. It's a way of life. كَمَا تَدِينُ تُدَانُ, as the Arabs say. How you treat others, you'll be treated. In other words, the mode, the manner by which you do your life, then you can expect something in return from others. And so the Deen then is bigger than just ritual practices. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Kafirun, لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينُ. You have your deen, you have your way, you have your worldview, you have your understanding. وَلِيَ دِينِي, and I have my deen, my way of understanding, and so forth. So then, what does modernity mean? Well, one of the defining aspects of modernity is that it wants to define everything for you. And it doesn't want to leave you to define things for yourself that may have a fundamentally opposing view on things. And modernity, and now when I say modernity, I don't mean contemporary times. I don't mean the fact that we drive automobiles and that we use iPhones and that we have email. That's not modernity. Modernity is the underlying philosophy that propels us the way that we are going and informs the kind of common understanding between people in a particular society. That's modernity. And modernity wasn't always here. The thesis that we wrote, I called the book Islam Before Modernity. And most ulama locate modernity as beginning somewhere in the late 18th century. For Muslims, that was a very defining time because it marked the first encroachment since the Crusades that European powers came to Muslim shores. And this was reflected in the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt in 1798. So that's a couple of years right before the beginning of the 19th century, so very late 18th century. And it was at this time that the fracture was obvious between how Muslims viewed life and how Muslims conducted their lives versus what was happening in Europe at the time. And it's still continuing to happen, not just in Europe, but now all over the world. And modernity continues to develop and change and redefine itself. And we struggle sometimes to keep up with it because, to use a metaphor, the goalposts are always changing. Can't actually score the goal when the goalpost, in 1992 is over here, then it moves over here. And the goalposts will continue to move. So we're in 2023, certainly by 2030, things will be much different again. And people's understanding of what is taboo or what is allowed or what is perceived to be good or what is perceived to be not good will be different once again. And that's one of the defining aspects of modernity, this constant flux and change. What we say, عدم استقرار الثوابت. There are no kind of guiding, anchoring principles. The only guiding, anchoring principle is that there are no guiding, anchoring principles, that things are subject to change. And in our Muslim or Islamic discourse, we view such fickleness and constant changing, and the word we use for that is hawa or al-ahwa. And hawa means the thing that just is kind of like the wind. You put a blade of grass up to the wind, it goes wherever the wind goes. And what propels people to do things like this is something that's internal to them, something we'll call il-hawa. وَمَنْ نَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. In the Quran, وَمَنْ نَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. Whoever prevents or prohibits their nafs, their ego, who they are, عَنِ الْهَوَى, from their caprice, from just moving with the wind, whichever way it goes, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Then paradise is their abode. So it seems it's like a very important, significant, big deal thing, because if that's all I have to do to get to paradise, or it's one of the monumental things I need to be doing to get to paradise, is to prevent myself from following my hawa. And in another verse, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes their caprice as their Lord? So now hawa sounds like something a little more than just my whim and, you know, having an appetite for ice cream at 7 p.m. That may be hawa, but this sounds a little bit more significant, a little bit bigger than just having a whim or a craving for something. So the understanding of hawa then is much more significant, larger and important and pivotal than just my personal feelings at a particular sense in time. And we say that in the absence of principles, of morals, of ethics, of values, the default for most human beings will be their hawa, will be whatever they feel doing at the time. And the perhaps not interesting thing about hawa, but kind of disturbing thing about hawa is that it also has the ability to try to convince you that it's something other than your hawa, something other than your whim. It will try to convince you that it is principled, and that it is ethical, and that it is morally bound. That's why when you try to get sometimes in a conversation with somebody and try to convince them about the, you know, the truth of something or the validity of something, but yet your argument is sound, your logic is sound, everything makes sense, and you're quite aware of that, but the other person is not seeing your logic, is not seeing the validity of your argument, is not seeing the soundness. And the reason for that is because they're not operating on logic and soundness and intellect. What they're operating upon is their hawa, is what they feel about it at the time. And now increasingly we are seeing this idea of hawa in the sense of modernity as having the stranglehold on what people deem to be acceptable or not acceptable. We now live in an age where people can clearly defy hard facts and claim something else. Biological facts and claim something completely different. You know, it's up, no, it's down. It's left, no, it's right. It's green, no, it's red. It's white, no, it's black. So forth. You know, to the degree that people take on identities of even other ethnicities and other genders and other things, and, you know, even to the extent of even outside of the human species and human race. And all that is hawa. So what we're seeing increasingly is the sacralizing of hawa. This is the logical conclusion of modernity. If modernity is based upon the idea that whatever you see fit is okay, and that I can make the world as I see fit, and as I feel about something, I can make it into that image, then what's left? I think it was Heidegger, one of the Western philosophers himself, he said, the pre-modern world says, know thyself. And the modern world says, be thyself. So instead of knowing as the principal obligation and activity of the human mind and the intellect, now being has become the principal activity and human activity of the intellect, rather than knowing things. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, I have not created the jinn and the human beings except that they may worship me. Ibn Abbas, the great Sahabi and Mufassir, he said, إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونَ was his understanding, except that they may know me. And we say that the primal obligation The primal obligation for every human being is what? Is to know Allah. That's the primal obligation. And if you don't know Allah, at the very least that Allah exists, then it's like you don't know anything. You can have as many PhDs as you have and as many Nobel Prizes and so forth, but if you don't know Allah, that He exists, then you don't know anything. And hence you find these very silly propositions and arguments being put forward to say that Allah doesn't exist. From what seem to be very intelligent people, or at least people who are respected for their intelligence. One person said, these people who seems to be an intelligent person, that the sublimity or the perfection of what we find in our universe, and everything seems to be kind of in a very ordered, not a chaotic manner, is because we got very lucky. Because before this universe, there were many, many universes. There was a multiverse. Have you guys heard of that word before? Is it now not in the popular culture? Marvel Comics, Marvel Universe, Multiverse. Didn't come from Marvel. It came from theorists a century ago. This idea of the multiverse. Because if I say something happens by chance, then if I give it enough iterations, then maybe that chance will become reality. So if I say the universe happened by chance, well, they would ask me, well, what is the probability that the universe can happen by accident? And if I say like 1 in a million, or if I say 1 in a billion, or 1 in a trillion, then they'll say, then there was a trillion times it didn't work, and this is the one time it did work. That's your theory? So you ask us to believe in many, many failures of the universe happening, and then this is the one time we got lucky? And it's an absurd assertion, right? It's the same way like if I said, there's a famous example, if you have 12 monkeys in a room, and you cut out pieces of paper and write letters on them, and give them millions of these letters, how many times will the monkeys need to arrange all these letters into words and sentences and make it into a book, a novel that makes sense? There's no number of times. It's an absurd suggestion. But this is what these minds are suggesting, that somehow it all came together by an accident. Another so-called brilliant mind said that we just have to solve the gaps in our knowledge. Then we eliminate the need for God. So once we know how everything works, and we have a theory of everything, then we don't need God anymore. So basically it's saying, once I figure out how this lighting system works in the masjid, then I don't need any more engineers or electrical engineers, because I figured out how it works. And it can come by itself. There's no need to have a source of where it came from. Another absurd suggestion. But once again, this is what something is putting out as an intelligent argument. But I would put before you, it's all ahwa. It's all hawa. It's all caprice. Because they want to deny what can be none other than absolutely true. So why do people deny God then? Why do they do that? One of the great Sufi theologians and scholars, Sayyidi Ahmad ibn Ata al-Sakandari, wrote the hikam. One of the hikam, it says, إنما حجب عنك الله شدة قربه منك. إنما حجبك عنك الله شدة قربه منك. God has been veiled from you because of His closeness to you, or because of the severity of His closeness to you. He is so close you can't see Him. You know how if you look at something really close, if I put my eyes right here on this microphone, I don't see a microphone, I just see a blur. I can't see it because it's so close. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided and ordered the universe in such a perfect order to sustain life and continue life and for people to thrive and survive and so forth, that we take all of that for granted. It's like we don't see it. We don't see all of that because we're in it. They say that knowledgeable people don't know they're knowledgeable because they're always in the bubble of knowledge. So they don't see themselves as that knowledgeable because that's what they know. And the adverse is true. They say that ignorant people don't see themselves as ignorant because they're inside their ignorance and they don't see outside of it. So it's only when they're confronted with something different, like, oh wait, maybe I'm not that smart after all because this person seems really intelligent and I just said something really silly in front of them. But if they're operating on their hawa, on their caprice, none of that becomes evident to them. They don't see any of it. So why am I saying all of this in the beginning? Because we have to understand why things are going the way they are. Why do people function the way they do in the absence of Deen? In the absence of Deen. Once we can understand what is propelling them, right, what is almost compelling them to be that aware the way that, what the things that they do, then we can begin to understand not just why things are the way they are, but we can also begin to address things and do something about the way that they are. And more importantly, to address those shortcomings and failures and deficiencies within ourselves. You know, don't take it for granted just because you're Muslim that you have no hawa, that you have no caprice. We all do. Otherwise, why would Allah state in the Quran, وَمَنْ نَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى? Why would He say it so emphatically that whoever prevents their hawa from taking over, then they will have paradise? So in the absence of Deen, in the absence of sound, grounded understanding, balanced understanding of the Deen, and the teachings that our Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam came with, there will be hawa, there will be caprice. And in as much as I am embodying the teachings of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then I will be less prompted or less able to follow my hawa, and then more able to follow the way of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that way is a Deen. It's all encompassing. It's how we see things, it's how we look at things, it's how we look at ourselves, it's how we look at other people, it's how we conduct our relationships, it's how we build places like this. He did not leave anything. فيه تبيان لكل شيء. Everything is in the Quran, everything is explained. It has set the pathway and the groundwork and the foundation to literally do anything that Muslims need to do, that humanity needs to do. Prophet ﷺ was not just the best Muslim, he was the best human. And he is not just the best human, he is the best of all creation. خَيْرُ خَلْقِ اللَّهِ. He is the best of all creation. Why such a lofty status that he's better than the sun, the moon, the stars, حَتَّى الْعَرْشُ وَالْكُرْسِي. He's better than all those things. Why? Because of this is what he brought. And so the significance of humanity is immense. Sometimes we misjudge that because we look at our physicality and we think, well, we're like this little speck in the universe. But Sayyidina Imam Ali, what did he say about that? تَحْسَبُ نَفْسَكَ جُرْمٍ صَغِيرٍ رَفِيقٍ انطوى العالم. You think you're this little speck, but within you is the universe. As is above is below. The macrocosm and the microcosm. العالم الكبير والعالم الصغير. وهذا العالم كبير وهذا العالم صغير. This is the major universe, the macroverse, the macrocosm, because it has everything in it that reflects what is above. So just as we look to the stars and the celestial realm and we see orbits and we see كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ, same thing internally here. And when Allah talked about the validity of signs of Allah, He talked about both. وَفِي الْأَرْضِ آيَاتٌ لِلْمُوقِنِينَ, here, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ, and in the earth there are signs for you to reflect upon, and within yourselves, will you not reflect upon those things? So the faculty that we've been given, the intellect, the ability to reflect and contemplate and meditate and see, to the degree that how we are the best version of ourselves is based upon how we do things and how we see things. When the Prophet ﷺ was asked about al-ihsan, اخبرني عن al-ihsan, by Jibreel alayhi salam, what did he say? تعبد الله كأنك تراه. Worship Allah as if you see Him. Well, that requires a little imagination because I can't see Him. But then he didn't tell me you can see him. He said, تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ, as if you see him. So something about divinity then has to be imprinted upon my heart and consuming my whole being so that I can worship and be as if I see Allah all the time. Then the ulama called this status, this maqam, al-mushahada. Al-mushahada. But it is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not everyone will reach it in this life, though they may reach it in the next. So then he brought the next part of that, ihsan. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. But if you don't see him, know that he sees you. So you don't have to have an imagination so much in that one, but you have to have a sound knowledge that Allah exists and he sees you all the time. وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. And he is with you wherever you may be. So either we see Allah and worship him as if we see him, so that, not that we're, and those two things are different, by the way. Worshiping Allah as if you see him doesn't mean that you're aware he sees you, because that's mentioned in the second part. It's not talking about being fearful of Allah and the consequences that may come if you do something wrong. That's not what that part is talking about. تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. That means you see Allah in everything. The Sahaba used to say things like that. مَا رَأَيْتُ شَيْءٍ إِلَّا رَأَيْتَ اللَّهَ قَبْلَهُ أَوْ بَعْدَهُ أَوْ مَعَهُ أَوْ فِيهِ. I did not see anything except I saw Allah before it, because the existence of that thing wouldn't be unless Allah created it and caused it to exist. أَوْ بَعْدَهُ. Or I saw that thing except I saw Allah after it, because that thing one day if it came into existence then it will go out of existence. That's the nature of the world. It's fani, it's temporary, it's not meant to last. And I'm always aware of that. أَوْ مَعَهُ. I did not see anything except I saw Allah with that thing, because it wouldn't sustain itself. Allah didn't just create it and walk away. He created and he continues to sustain it. In other words, he continues to create it. The concept, the idea of continuous creation. So the entity that you were 3 seconds ago is not the same one right now. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided not to recreate you, you wouldn't be. You would cease to exist. And I don't mean die. I mean you didn't exist. You're gone, as if you never were. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can sustain you like that. No other thing. So they were always aware of this, the Sahaba and the great awliya, wal-asfiya, wal-atqiya. And it was on this sound and foundational understanding that they did what they did. They built institutions, they built masajid, they built things so that others may arrive to this understanding and this sense of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As they say, الساجد قبل المساجد. You know, the sajid قبل المساجد. Think about the sajid, the one who's making sujood before the masjid. Because the masjid is a means, it's not an end. It's to facilitate the building of human beings. We could have just as easily called the masjid, human spirituality factory. Because that's what it does. It's supposed to be a factory to produce the best human beings. You come into a space, the open space. The front is the same as the back. The sacred space is the space in front of you. It's only for the organization of the congregation that we have the imam in the front and everybody behind him. But otherwise, it's all equal. Yes, there's a greater merit to pray in the first row than in the last row for men. But why is that? Because it indicates that you were first to get there. Which means that you follow the verse, وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. Right? سَارِعُوا الْمُسَارِعَ. You were eager and fast. وَعَجِلْتُ إِلَيْكَ رَبِّي لِتَرْضَى. As Musa alayhi salam said, عَجِلْتُ إِلَيْكَ رَبِّي لِتَرْضَى. I hasten towards you so that you may be contented and pleased with me. So it's an indication that you were hastening towards the good. Not that the first row is necessarily any better than the other rows. And then when we have that understanding, then we build all our institutions like this. The madaris, the mushaf, the Quran itself, which was not in one book before the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And the Sahaba were reluctant at the beginning to put it into one mushaf, one book. And then he told them, إِنَّهُ لَخَيْرٌ وَاللَّهِ إِنَّهُ لَخَيْرٌ. I swear by Allah, it's a good thing. Let's do it. These were the sound principles by which they operated. That's how they not just preserved the Deen, they made the Deen thrive. They understood the context of their time. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq knew that even within a few years after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, that the Quran had to be canonized. It had to be put in one volume. And then Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu furthered that project and then had only authorized versions of the Quran. Because though the Prophet ﷺ was given this concept that some of you may have heard of, Sabat Ahruf, the Quran was revealed in 7 letters, which is not the same as the 7 qira'at or 10 qira'at, the 7 recitations, but there are slight variations. Even in the qira'at and the versions he would recite to the Sahaba. So the Sahaba did not want them arguing over this, because there was the battle of Yamama in the furthest part of Arabia, and many of the Huffaz were lost. So it wasn't going to be dependent upon mere memorization anymore. There had to be written version. Something the Prophet ﷺ did not authorize or do in his life. But they realized it had to be done. Even during the life of the Prophet ﷺ himself, he did things that weren't from his culture. We know the great Salman al-Farisi, the one that the Prophet ﷺ said, Salmanu minna al al-bayt. Salman is from us, the al al-bayt, from the people of the Nubuwwah, the household of the Prophet ﷺ. And he was from Persia. And he was a high prince in Persia. And he searched for Deen, he searched for the last prophet. And he studied with monks and he studied with priests in Jerusalem till they sent him to Arabia, and he was enslaved because no one knew him. And then he found himself in Yathrib in Medina. And then he saw the Prophet ﷺ, and then he knew he was a prophet. Salman, during the Battle of the Trench, when the Sahaba were going to be surrounded by this 10,000-man Confederate army, and some of the companions said, well, let's fight them in battle, as we usually do. But the odds were against them. 10,000 horse, arrows. They had maybe 3,000. So Salman said, let's build a trench. This is what we did in Persia. And we only have to cover the northern side because the rest of the sides of Medina are protected by the lava rock in the mountains. And they did. And they dug the trench. And it was deep. And it held off for 1 month the siege of the Confederate army. That was by Quraysh, and some of the Confederates are in Medina, and one of the Jewish tribes of Medina. Something that the Arabs didn't know, the Prophet ﷺ didn't know during his lifetime. When the Prophet ﷺ wanted to get to send messages and official greetings to Kisra and in the Sassanid Persian Empire, and Caesar in the Byzantine Empire, they told him, well, they're not going to accept any letters from you unless you seal it, something official that comes from you. It was not the custom of the Arabs at the time to do that. They would just send their ambassador. They knew this came from this tribe. So he took a ring, a seal, that had Allah, Rasul Muhammad, as we know. And he would imprint all of the official letters with that seal to send to, with his emissaries to these places. So he was willing and understood, even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that times change. And we can't do things exactly the same way that they were done the generation before. Certainly there are thawabit, there are things that don't change. And our ulama have clearly and meticulously delineated those things and the principles by which we may understand things that change and things that don't. No one is going to come and change the 5 prayers, or fasting of Ramadan, or the zakah, or hajj. We're not going to move hajj from Mecca to Las Vegas. Hajj is going to remain in Mecca forever. But some things can be adaptable. Some things can change. There were no spaces, institutionalized spaces during the time of the Prophet ﷺ except the mosque, except the masjid. And it didn't have a mihrab like this either. And it didn't have a dome like this either. And in fact, it didn't have a roof in the beginning. But these things came late. It didn't have a carpet. But the ulama, wal-awliya, they understood that these things needed to be done to facilitate the continuing practice of the deen. So they built doors, they put carpets, they even synthesized and incorporated aspects of other cultures where they went. This dome came from the Byzantine Empire, from the Visigoths. They had the domes before we had the domes. And then when Muslims entered into these countries and built their masajid, then they synthesized with the culture. So you'll find that the mosques that were built in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, didn't differ much in the architecture in terms of the congruence of the landscape from the churches that were already there. And they used local materials. They took the rock that was there. They took the gypsum that was there. They took the wood that was there and built from that. And then there's this sense of balance and order when you look at it. Look at the modern skyscraper, the modern office building. Look at the concrete apartment blocks that were built by the Soviets, for example, in the 60s and the 70s, in places like East Berlin and Prague. It's offensive. You walk there, and it's offensive to the nature of the human being. Because the underlying principles, the metaphysics of it, doesn't match with what is sacred to the human being. In fact, there's no sanctity, there's no sacredness upon which those buildings were inspired to be built. It was just pure functionality and did not have any allowance for the soul of the human being. It just looked at the basic life needs of the human being. And hence these kind of copy-paste apartment blocks. That's one aspect of modernity. So we need to understand how modernity functions, what propels modernity, and we need to understand our Deen very well, and what the core strength of the Deen is. So you have to go back to the root, to the basic, which is the human heart. That is the core strength. And in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. In the body, there's a morsel of flesh. If it's rectified, everything else will be rectified. And if it's corrupted, everything else will be corrupted. Verily, that is the heart, the spiritual heart. So this can be understood to be in the human body, the human being, and you can also understand it to be the heart of the ummah. The heart of the ummah. So if the heart of the ummah, the community itself, is rectified, everything else will be rectified. And if the heart of the ummah is corrupted, everything else will be corrupted. So what is the heart of the ummah? What's that? Or we should say, who is that? That's the Prophet ﷺ. He is the heart of the ummah. If we rectify our understanding and our relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, everything else will be rectified. Everything else will be rectified. If we follow his way, his deeds, what he said, and try to emulate his prophetic states of sincerity and honesty and mahabba, love, and root out things that contravene those states, jealousy, envy, greed, bad judgment, bad opinion of people, bad opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the ummah will once again do amazing things and continue to do amazing things. And we are doing amazing things. Despite all of this onslaught of this, really the last religion standing that is true to its core principles and beliefs is Islam. Everybody else has capitulated in some way or the other. But Muslims continue to pray in the same manner that they prayed 1,445 years ago. Muslims continue to read the same Quran that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ nearly 1,500 years ago. We have all of the texts documented and protected and saved. It's all preserved. Everything is there. Nothing's missing. Nothing has been lost in terms of what we need. But unless we act upon what we need to do, which is not the preservation of the text only, but the preservation of our hearts. And that cannot be done by the text alone. It cannot be done by preserving the Quran or the Hadith alone. It needs people who embody the Quran and the Hadith. It needs people who live the Quran and the Hadith. It needs the ulama, it needs the awliya, it needs the asfiya wal-atqiya wal-muhsinin. All of those layers of nur that are described for Muslims. We need all people like that. Inna rahmatallahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. The mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is close to the muhsinin, the one who practices ihsan. In other words, the one who allocates and places beauty where it belongs, and even creates beauty and creates good. هذا معنى المحسن. This is what a person who is muhsin in. هدى للمتقين. You want to reach the inner depths of the Quran, you have to be muttaqi. You want to reach the hidayah of the Quran, the huda of the Quran, you have to be muttaqi, person of taqwa. You have to act upon what you know. If you don't act upon what you know, the Quran will not unlock its secrets to you. You will not go beyond just the page itself. لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. No one penetrates it or touches it except those who are mutahhar, those who have been purified. Both in terms of wudu, you can't touch the mushaf, and also spiritually, you can't penetrate the meanings unless you have this tahara ruhiyya, this tahara of the spirit. If we do that, if we once again reinitiate this institution building, not just the buildings, but of human beings, we empower them, we teach them, we show them how to be Muhammadi, we show them how to be like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We need people who are doing that. We need people who dedicate their life, every space, every moment in their life, to being Muhammadi, to being people of ihsan, to be people of Islam and Iman, and of taqwa, and of wilaya, and of safa, purity. These are all things we have. And it was always by the people of Allah, Ahlullah, that things change for the believers. Even in the face of adversity, even in the face of tyranny and terror and so forth, Islam somehow still managed not just to survive, but to thrive. What other culture, what other civilization became the occupied and became the terrorized, but yet the occupier and the terrorizer accepted the culture and the deen of the one who was occupied? So even in the face of the Mongol invasions that almost destroyed all of the Muslim heartland, the Asian, what are now the Asian Republic heartland of Islam, like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and all those places, were decimated by the Mongols. And they never returned to the thing that they were before. The heart of Islam used to be in those places. Bukhara is in Uzbekistan. It was the heart of knowledge production. After the Mongols, it was decimated. They went as far as Damascus and destroyed Iraq and Baghdad. It never returned to its former kind of status as a knowledge production city. But what stopped them? They became Muslim. That's what stopped them, basically. Yes, there was the army, the Mamluk army from Egypt that stopped them from going further west. But where they were already, what stopped them? They became Muslim. So Islam is so powerful that even when it seems to be in a weakened position, people still accept it. Even this country, right? Many people become Muslim probably every day. Despite all of the things and the difficulties and so forth, it's still bringing people into the Deen. And probably not much effort from ourselves. But nonetheless, even if they see a little bit of what we have, even just an inkling, a small thing of what they have, they become inspired. Imagine if we opened the door even more and we embodied even more and they saw who we really are or who we really can be. You would need like 10 floors like this to accommodate all the people from, what's this place called? Smithick? Is that right? And Birmingham, and further north, Manchester, Bradford. We'd need hundreds, thousands of these places for people to come. So before we transform our masajid, before we transform our institutions, we have to transform the sajid. We're the sajid, us. I didn't address any of the questions people may have. You can ask that in a question and answer. What do you about this issue or that issue or this thing or that thing? And I believe, really this is what I believe, that in order to address those questions, we have to be in a place where we can take them on from a place of, a high level of ihsan, where we have a strong love of the Deen, a strong love of the Prophet ﷺ, a strong connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then Allah will show us the way. I don't think it's about strategizing or having committee meetings and all these sorts of things. We may be there to help, but ultimately, the great things that have been done by this ummah have been done by people who were inspired to do it. Allah put those meanings, indicated those meanings in their hearts. From Abu Bakr as-Siddiq putting the Mus'haf into one, a meaning that was inspired to his heart, till the building of the Zawaya and the Masajid and incorporating the Ubab, incorporating the domes in Muslim architecture. I think all of those things were divinely inspired things. So we want to avail ourselves of divine inspiration. Allah will show us the way. No matter how intractable or difficult the problem seems, Allah always has a way for you to figure it out. مَا أَنزَلَ الدَّاءِ إِلَّا أَنزَلَ الدَّوَاءِ. He did not send down the malady except He sent down the remedy. So there's a remedy for everything. No matter how difficult you think it is, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's at a community level, or whether it's at a national level or societal level, there are always things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can inspire to the divine seekers, inshallah. So I'm going to stop here, inshallah, for what I have to say about this so far. I think we have some time in terms of question and answer that the brothers will happily take from you, either by the microphone or if you want to write it down. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
So if you come for writing it down, please just give them to the brothers and sisters. If anybody wants to start, then we'll start the question first. There's loads of questions coming from the sisters, but brothers, let's start here. Anybody wants to start the question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Is there an Islamic basis for gradualism? And do you think that...
For what? For what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Is there an Islamic basis for gradualism? And as Muslims, can we integrate, let's say, like the concept of believing or compromising our belief?
What was the word you said? Gradual. I don't understand the word that you asked.
Gradualism.
Gradualism. What do you mean by that?
Like, as Muslims, is there like a basis for us to over generations integrate into the society? Like, in the state of Israel, because that's the dominant in Islamic society.
I understand.
And then, like, can we do that without compromising our belief?
Right, okay. One thing that I want you to think about is don't always accept the dichotomy that is presented to you. So dichotomy means it's either this or that. Either we're integrated in society and we lose our beliefs, or we remain separated and keep our beliefs. Why is those only two choices? Is there not a way that we can be part and parcel of the society and contributing members of the society and at the same time continue to be upon our beliefs and our values and our ethics? I think there is a way. And I think Muslims have always done that. And they've always endeavored to do that. Otherwise, how can you talk about, Islam coming to East Africa, for example, from all the way from, Mozambique and Kenya and Somalia. All of these places came into Islam, Tanzania, and there were no armies, there was no fighting. It was Muslim du'at, people who went there and invited people to Islam. And the same thing that happened in Indonesia and Malaysia and the Malabar coast of India. All those people were invited to Islam by people who brought Islam to them. And they intermarried and they participated and they contributed and they had tijara, they had trade, they had all these things. They did not live an insular, sort of isolated existence from the greater population. Because they understood they had a responsibility. And the responsibility is, بَلِّغُ عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. Convey the message even if it's by one ayah, by one verse. So we can hold on to, we can do both. That's not impossible. We need not be assimilated or integrated. In other words, I'm not talking about do we dress in a sarwal qamis or do we wear a business suit. That's not an indication of integration or values. I'm talking about what's in here. How we dress is kind of a secondary issue. But how we interact, how we worship, how we behave, how we understand, how we conduct our relationships. These are the things that we want to preserve. These are the things that not just preserve, we want them to thrive and we want other people to see that. And when they see that, they'll want to be a part of it too. But as long as we're locked up and we're not out, and nobody sees who we are or what we do, not only will they not know who we are, they will not understand us, and also they will have suspicions and doubts about us, because we remain a mystery. Right? We want to demystify what Islam is. There are so many of you in the UK that it shouldn't be a mystery to people. The door should be open for anyone to come and ask and see and find out, and maybe even feel what it's like to listen to a Jum'ah or to pray or to stand with other people. You have something they don't have. I was telling the other congregation, the other group, we come together 5 times a day and we stand shoulder to shoulder and we're praying to each other, and there's this human interaction and contact with people we may not even know, but nonetheless you feel a love and a happiness for. Show me where else you can do that here. The Premier League match, the mall, the shopping center, none of those places have that. People just go to where other people congregate because they're lonely and they just want to see other people walking back and forth. But here there's actual community, people coming together. Everybody longs for that. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to feel they're a part of something, part of a community. And you have that, and you can offer that. So why would we not?
What's your advice on educating children at home?
So this question is relating to education, and I guess some of the changes that are being made in education, or at least public education, most notably some of the LGBTQ issues, I think, that are coming up. And I've been asked this question quite a bit, and what I would say is the LGBTQ, let's call it ideology, because that's what it is inseparable from modernity. In fact, it's kind of the epitome of modernity, in the sense that people can declare whatever they wished about themselves and see it as truth, and then want to impose that truth on other people. And that actually violates one of the core principles of a Western liberal democracy, is that you don't impose your particular truth on someone else. But this becomes under strain when that truth is claimed to be a British value or a universal value. In other words, everyone should feel this way about this issue. Everyone should adopt this belief because it's universal, it's just part of human nature. Well, if it was such a part of human nature, why didn't you feel that way about it 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Why doesn't your grandfather feel that way about it if it's so universal? Then you go to another principle of modernity, the idea of progress. So the reason that they wouldn't feel about it, because those people didn't understand, they weren't progressive. And so progress means, as time goes by, then we will only grow more progressive, in a sense, better people, just by the notion of the passing of time. That's one of the core tenets of the philosophy of modernity. We don't actually believe that. In fact, in our kind of Muslim ethos, we see that things in terms of people's character and morals is generally getting worse, not getting better. And we go by timeless, sound principles in the revelation. And we believe the revelation is sound and true for all times and all places. Now what I just explained to you, you need to explain to your children. You have to let them in on it. You can't, isolate them. If they have a phone, if they have an iPad, if they have any connection to the outside world, they already know about all these things. They already know the word lesbian and gay and homosexual. I promise you they know those words. Because I work at a school, primary level school kids, not in this country, but in Dubai, and they know all those words, even in a Muslim country. All they have to do is get on YouTube and play their, whatever video or TikTok or Twitch, when they watch other people at video games. I don't understand that phenomenon, but that's what the kids do. All those things come up. So you have to empower them with the way we see things, with the narrative, before someone else does it for you. Now, whether you're going to keep your kids in school, or you're going to have a private school or a homeschool, those are issues and questions I think you all have to think about on your own. But I think every single parent, if they haven't done so already, and at their earliest convenience, in other words, when their children are ready to understand, they have to have that conversation with them. And don't think that they don't already know about it or somewhat aware of it or somewhat curious, because it's already there. And that's what I mean, we have to navigate our context and our times. There was probably a time, maybe a generation ago or 2 generations ago, no one would have thought about discussing anything about gender and sexuality or anything like that with their kids before they were 18 or 19 or whatever it was. You know, there wasn't a need because the society itself wasn't so sexualized in that sense. But that's not the time we live in. We live in a time where it's not like that. And so we have to adapt, and we have to meet the challenges of the time. And as I said to another group, you know, if your child falls into the sea and you're worried that the waves will envelop them and drown them, your first impulse might be, I wish I can just deplete the sea of the water. Take away all of the water, and then they'll be fine. But you can't actually do that. That's impossible. So what do? You teach them to swim. And you teach them to swim very well. You teach them the free stroke and the breaststroke and the backstroke and all the things they need to do to swim and be an expert swimmer and dive and come up, and because that's the thing they're going to face, the challenges that they're meeting, and you're not always going to be there for them. So you have to equip them with the tools by which they can navigate it. And explain to them, you know, this is how these societies work. 10 years from now, they're going to say something else that was wrong is going to be right. Are we going to change with that too? Or do we have something more beautiful and something more profound that's timeless, that doesn't change in that way, that guides us from the beginning of time to the end of time? That's what we have, and that's something really beautiful. Alhamdulillah. So the question was, we have deficiencies ourselves, how can we effectively educate our children? Education is a community project, it's not a single family project. Education is a community project. And what I mean by education is not just ta'aleem, not just teaching people like basics how to read and how to understand, but tarbiyah, right? Tarbiyah means nurturing of the souls, how to be a human being, not just how to be a citizen or how to be an engineer or how to be a doctor, but how to be a human being. And that's something we have a lot to say about. This is called tarbiyah. And that cannot be done just by the mother and the father alone. They have a large part to play, definitely, but it's a community project. And it's not just a community of the time that we live in. This has been the project or the activity of Muslims since the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ مُعَلِّمًا إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمِ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I have not been sent except as a teacher. I have not been sent except to perfect character traits. That's education. We call it education today, but this is tarbiyah. This is ta'aleem, this is akhlaq, this is character. So we need all of us, all hands on deck, really, in order to do that right. It's not enough to hear the message from the mother and the father. They have to hear it from the uncle and from the cousin and from the imam and from the mufti and from everyone involved in the education. So the mosque or the masjid has to be a center for that, but it's not the only place. It has to be reinforced wherever. So you need a community, right? And you need a community that's functioning like the heart of a single person for that to work. And we need to come up with healthy alternatives for the things that our children are going to be challenged with. You know, the devices and the iPhones and the iPads, they're really a major, major challenge that can really, not just in terms of the addictive nature of it, that kind of changes the way that your mind functions. You know, it's been documented like when you scroll down via a page, then your mind begins to function like scrolling down through things. And you have then develop a limited attention span. And you can't do deep reading anymore, like actually take a book and sit there for half an hour, and understand and read and have, you know, the book interact with it like a companion. Very few people can do that today. If you ask yourself as an adult, how many books have you read in the past year? How many of us can say 2 or more? And if the answer is, well, not really, I kind of read magazines and newspaper articles and I haven't actually read a book, I don't know what to tell you, but reading books is very important. And to instill the love of reading books, even reading a book of fiction in English is way better than them scrolling on TikTok or YouTube or any of those things. So that requires community, that requires a group effort, that requires all of us to sacrifice collectively in order to kind of construct this environment for our children. But to try to do it alone in your house, I mean, very difficult. We have to the best of our ability, but if you don't have the major community, then develop a minor community. It could be you and another family, or 2 other families, or 3 other families, whatever that may be. And it can be just gatherings of companionship and suhbah and, you know, mutual understanding and introduce the kids to one another and that sort of thing. That's how these things start. Allahu A'lam. This is an old question. Should we stay here or should we go move back to, or for some people who are born here, they're not actually moving back, they're just moving for the first time to a Muslim country. And maybe 30 years ago I would have said, yeah, good idea if you can find it, but really now there's no difference in terms of the challenges we're facing between a Muslim country or a Muslim majority country and a Muslim minority country. I have found the case, and specifically the UK, that in some communities there's a stronger, better, let's call it Islamic environment than in many Muslim majority countries. And I live now in a Muslim majority country and I frequent them a lot. And these same issues I'm talking to you about, I'm talking to them about. And in the same language. For many of our children in those Muslim majority countries, they're much more comfortable with English than Urdu or than Arabic or Farsi or Malay. This is the nature of how things have happened or developed, especially in the past few decades. And so you may go there and you may be shocked to find it's not exactly what you thought it would be in terms of the expectations that you had. Now, that being said, I cannot say that it's the same. No, there's still many merits to being in a Muslim majority country, the masajid, the adhan, the public display of Islam, that's kind of easier. But I mean, to be honest with you, from the moment I landed in Heathrow till the time I'm here with you, I can count on my fingers the number of non-Muslims I've interacted with. And I'm talking about public things, not like the masjid. I'm talking about the taxi driver or the hotel or people on the street or restaurant or owner. They're all Muslim so far. And it kind of like astounded me. You know, believe it or not, but you have so much you can do in this country. And we are coming upon the age of one of our good friends. He has this Mizan thesis, Sidi Ahmed Keeler, the age of sanctuary and refuge, which means people are going to be looking for an escape. They're going to look for a place of refuge and sanctuary from just the crushing tyranny of modernity that's happening. The economic opportunities that used to happen in the past are becoming less frequent. We have an encroaching thing called artificial intelligence, even though it's not really that is going to rob people, many people of their livelihood, of their jobs. When you can have a prompt on a computer laptop do what an accountant does, and would have taken him weeks or days or months, and now the computer does it in a matter of seconds or minutes. And so it's not a question, can we stop it? It's already here. It's not going to be stopped. So we have to think about how we are going to be places of refuge and sanctuary for our communities and other communities, other people too. You know, we have to see what's kind of on the horizon and what's around the corner. And it's challenging. I'm not going to say it's sad or it's bleak, because Islam صالح لكل زمان ومكان. Islam will function and do great in any time and any place. But there's going to be challenges, and we have to do our best to meet those challenges, inshallah. Yeah.
This was announced Shaykh's wife saw the video as a children's book, which is to say, can you purchase it for you? And the Prophet also signed it.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى مستون من سترك الجميل. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا هب لنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. ويا الله يا الله يا الله بجاه أسماء الله وصفات الله وأنبياء الله ورسل الله والصالحين من عباد الله نقضي حوائجنا ظاهرا وباطنا، وأرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه، وارزقنا حسن الخاتمة. نصر الله فتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين. إن على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. سألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. لك الحمد إذا رضيت، ولك الحمد حتى ترضى، ولك الحمد بعد الرضا، ولك الحمد كالذي نقول، لك الحمد كالذي تقول، ولك الحمد على كل حال. اللهم اجعل السر منا لا تهتك الستر عنا، واعفنا واعف عنا وكنا حيث كنا، وأيقظ قلوبنا لك ونبهنا من الغفلة عنك، وأيقظ قلوبنا لك ونبهنا من الغفلة عنك. واجعل آخر كلامنا لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Oh, MashaAllah. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Missed you.
I missed you too. I really did miss you. It's nice to see you.
Assalamu alaikum. Astaghfirullah.
Push him.